right, well, thank you so much for coming and joining us for this afternoon with Carl Safina and his book, Alfie and Me, What Owls Know, What Humans Believe. I'd like to thank the friends of the library who make these programs possible. I'd also like to thank Barrett Bookstore, who have the book for sale and some note cards with really nice art of owls. Please silence your phones, and we'll take questions at the end of the program. Now let me tell you a little bit about Carl. Carl is a MacArthur Genius Fellow who Audubon magazine named as one of its 100 notable conservationists of the 20th century. That's quite a compliment. That's quite an award. Yeah, well, that's good. His best-selling books, which include Portraits of Ocean Animals, an account of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and analysis of the cultures and feelings of wild animals, have received numerous awards. A longtime resident of Long Island, he is an endowed professor for nature and humanity at the University of New York.
Okay, hi everybody. Well, I must be done since you all just applauded. So are there any questions? Yes, the thing is, SUNY is the State University of New York, so we call it a couple of different things. The provost thinks that nobody has ever heard of it because we don't call it the University of New York at Stony Brook. It's silly. The other thing that's silly is the traffic on 95. That's why I got here with 1 minute to spare, which hasn't happened to me in decades. And I thank you all for being indoors on what it turned into a beautiful Sunday afternoon. The only thing that was saving me during the drive here was I was thinking nobody is coming because it's such a nice day. They all want to be in their gardens and stuff like that. But okay, we'll try to give you a sufficient amount of nature indoors. And we're going to obviously talk about the theme of my book. Now, a lot about what this book is about is in the subtitle, and especially in the subtitle after the comma. So we're going to talk about both of those things. And we're going to talk about connection and disconnection with the living world, and how a little owl that we raised was a portal not just on nature but on how we think about nature, because almost all of us are really very disconnected from the natural world. Even calling it the natural world is a disconnecting phrase because it suggests that we live in two worlds. And that is kind of fundamental to our thinking. Well, why are we so disconnected? Well, first of all, let's talk about this little owl that we named Alfie. That's the first look I got at her in a text message. And somebody texted me and said, "Do you know what kind of bird this is?" And I said, "Yeah, a dead one." I couldn't believe that this was still alive. Little found baby owl chick. I squinted at the photo and I said, well, looking at the feet there and the beak, that is an owl. It's got to be a screech owl from the size of it. What happened? So somebody had found it on their lawn and called a wildlife rehabilitator. That rehabber used to work for me and was our pet sitter. And I used to be a rehabber and I used to be a falconer. And I have a lot of experience with birds, especially hawks and owls. So she did a great job of stabilizing this little bird and bringing it back to perky little life. And then we kind of put our heads together about what we would do next. We decided that a soft release in my backyard would be a good idea, because I have about 30 acres of woods behind the house. And so this little owl got very healthy. We named it Alfie because we didn't know the gender. So I thought Alfie was short for alfalfa from the Our Gang comedies because she's a little rascal. So it was meant to be a gender-neutral name. And it sounds like Owlfie. And it worked. And the idea was that right around the time that we had the bird for about 2 or 3 weeks, we started calling her she because everybody calls everything he. So we wanted to be a little different. So we started calling her she, and we thought, about 2 or 3 weeks, she'll be ready to fly, and we'll just let her fly. That's a soft release. A hard release is you keep them in a cage for a long time, and then you take them somewhere and you open the door, which can work. It's a little bit like abandonment, but we wanted to do this soft release, just let her come and go until she decided to go. But she had a problem, and the problem was that although she's really healthy and all her feathers grew in really nicely there on her body, the long feathers on her wings did not come in, so she could not fly. And when her brain was telling her it's time to fly, all she could do was flap around and flop around on the ground. And so there could be no release. I was afraid that when those feathers finally did come in, which they did late, very late, that she would not molt them properly. So I wanted to keep her until she got her adult feathers in about 2 months to see if she was actually going to be releasable. So, whoa, 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 whoa. What in the world? Wow, that never happened before. All right, are there any questions now? All right, so she molted all her feathers, and all those feathers, the long feathers that had come in very, very late, dropped out normally, came in normally, and she was perfect. I mean, that is a perfect, beautiful little creature. And then we had another problem at that time, which was that winter was coming. This happened in the autumn, and it's getting too cold for all the insects that they would eat a lot of. In the winter, it's harder, and she had no hunting experience. So I was very reluctant to let her go at that point. So I kept her until the following spring. And then I started using some more or less falconry techniques. I just started to get her in shape for eventual release into the time of the year when there is abundant food, when she normally would have fledged. Now it's almost a year later. She normally would have fledged into the summer when there's a lot of bugs around, a lot of mice, and nestling birds and things like that they would normally hunt. So we left the door open. She came and went for a couple of nights, and then she went, and she really went. She just left. And we left food out, and it was staying there. She was definitely not around. And the first morning that she was gone, I found a bunch of her feathers on the near the back steps of my kitchen, and I thought, wow, that's her first time out, and she got killed. And I really felt horrible about that because I had been pacing back and forth for not only weeks, actually months, thinking she's totally healthy, she's totally safe here in the chicken coop, and letting her out with all the dangers, it seems terrible, but life in a cage is life in a cage. It's not life. It's not the life she was born to live, and freedom is very dangerous. So she had to face it, but I didn't think that she would just get killed instantly. And then I thought, well, maybe she just got attacked, and maybe she's still alive. Maybe just some blue jays pulled a few feathers out or something, and she's actually alive. So she was gone for about a week. I was away. I got a text on my phone at 4 in the morning because I was in Portugal. At 4 in the morning, I got a text, and the text said, "Guess who's back?" So Alfie came back to our yard and never left, and has never left. She's about to turn 6 years old. Next month, she will be 6. But she centered her territory on our yard. And by this time, as you can probably imagine and hear in the way that I talk about her. I was just extraordinarily fond of her, and the feeling was mutual. Let's just put it that way. This is not staged in any way. I didn't have a dead mouse in my mouth. She actually had just come down on a low branch because she liked to get scratched, and I thought, well, let me just get my phone ready and turn and purse my lips and get a cute photo, but she actually did that. So there was that, and then we had a big problem, and the big problem was a love triangle, because nobody who looks that good is going to stay single for long, right? So she almost immediately attracted a wild suitor, and this is where things really got very, very interesting to me, even more interesting than they had been, because I'm an ecologist and I used to study birds for a living, and we can all say, oh, she's so cute and it's so adorable and so beautiful, and that is true, and that is a big part of our reaction. But the other thing is that even with all the experience I had had with birds, it was very surprising to me what a relational being she was. Her capacity for relating, coming down low like that, to enjoy a scratch, to give me a little kiss, to recognize me and my wife as different from humans she didn't know, to recognize our 3 dogs as totally safe and familiar, but when a friend came with a dog she didn't recognize, she just was totally frightened and just thought it was a potentially very dangerous animal, because she knew who she knew, and she knew who she didn't know, and she knew where she was. And how do we know who we are? Because we know where we are and who we are with. That gives us our identity. And she had those capacities. And now she was showing that capacity with a wild bird, but not in an automatic way, not the way that you would learn in textbooks or I was taught in school, that, the hormones reach a certain level, and then the male does something, and that's courtship, and then the female responds to the courtship. He comes, he feeds her, and then she gets into mating readiness, and all of this is like automatic, like a signal and a response, and that's how it goes. And that's not how it went at all, because she was very hesitant about him at first. When he showed up, I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't tell if this was another owl trying to drive her out of the territory, her trying to drive him out of the territory, whether they were the same sex or different sex. I didn't know, because she didn't trust him, and there was just a lot of chasing back and forth. It was a little bit hostile and aggressive, and when that part settled down, she didn't simply trust him, and she didn't accept all of his gifts. He would frequently come and bring a moth to feed her, a little courtship feeding, and at first her basic response was, I'm not really convinced that this is what I'm into right now. And his persistence really allowed her to develop a level of trust, so that after a little while, a couple of weeks, I started to see them sitting closer to each other and her being calm. And then I started to see that every time he came with food, she started to accept it every time. And then I would see her come out of where she was roosting for the day, go to sort of a mutual sort of a rendezvous place that they frequently met, and she would call for him. So now that was a complete difference. And that was the development of their relationship and the trust and the bond that developed. It wasn't just an automatic thing where a male does something and a female does something else. It was the development of a relationship. How did I get to see all of this? Well, first of all, I got to see it because she remained thoroughly tame. And normally you don't have a thoroughly tame, free-living owl. And the other thing is, this was the spring of 2020 when all of our calendars got completely erased by the COVID shutdowns, and I didn't have anything better to do or anywhere better to go than to watch the owls for about 5 hours a day. I would come out. All right, how many of you have sat in office cubicles for 8 hours a day? I have you beat watching owls. I'll just tell you that, okay? Did you have a question? Which one is her? She's on the right. She's the one on the right who is getting the food and is about to accept the gift. Okay. So, yeah, it does. Because that's almost what they're doing. Right now, he's taking her basically on a dinner date. Things have not changed too much in 300 million years since our last common ancestor. So I would frequently get up before dawn. I would go to where I knew she was usually roosting during the daylight, and I'd see her go in the roost, or I'd come back out. I didn't watch them for 2 or 3 hours, and I'd come back out when it was getting toward late afternoon, sunset, watch them for another 2 or 3 hours at that time, and taking lots and lots of notes all the time. So I got to see all of this stuff that normally nobody ever gets to see. Now, if you learn about birds in school, you are told that birds have no external expression of any inner state. And often you're told they have no inner state. They're just little machines that have no awareness of anything they do. I don't know how you could come to that conclusion. That's just absurd. Well, I do know how you can come to that conclusion, but it's totally wrong. But you can see that some birds, and owls are among them, you can definitely see an expression of their inner state, because he is telling me, I really don't like you staring at us, and I'm really a little sick of you being around all the time. And she is completely in love and between the two most trusted beings in her life, me and her mate. And she's completely relaxed. And you can just easily read that on their faces and in their body postures. And then they did what young lovers do. You all remember that. And she took a nest box that I put up on the outer wall of my writing studio. And that is my wife looking for her mate. Not looking for my wife's mate. No, I'm my wife's mate. She's looking for Alfie's mate. So I figured Alfie might be on eggs by about the middle of April. And even though she was so completely tame, I did not want her to get I didn't want to feel any insecurity about the security of her nest box. So I did not want to go up there and look in when she might be in there. And I was also afraid that if she was on eggs and I startled her, she might break an egg or two. So I held off, and then I realized that every evening, right around sundown, she would come out and fly to the bird bath. That gave me a few minutes. So she would go to the bath and bathe, and then she would shake off, and then she would do a little spin cycle. And that gave me a few minutes to throw up a ladder, get up there, stick my phone in the box, and see what was in there. And there were eggs. Now, kind of an interesting thing is that when we see these eggs, your whole body reacts, and you say, ah, and that's really beautiful. And this is the most common thing in all of bird life, because every bird comes from an egg. But how many of us have ever actually seen eggs in a nest? With all these birds around us, they're so incredibly secretive. We have a lot of different birds in my backyard, and I essentially have never seen a nest. I can count the number of nests. In 17 years of living where we live, I have found 2 nests, and there have been hundreds of birds. So it's an amazing, amazing thing. I wasn't sure that they were fertile. I hoped they were, and I thought they probably were, but I wasn't sure, and I figured based on the incubation period when I should go back and check again, and right around the time they would be hatching, I checked a couple of times, and then one day I checked and they had all hatched. Now, to show you how small screech owls are when they hatch, that's all 3 owls huddled in a ball, and that's a white-footed mouse that their father caught. They are tiny. So the parents were very, very competent parents. That's one of them with a moth, probably the father. The father does most of the feeding of the young ones and the female. And when they got to be really rapidly growing, when they were at their peak rate of growth, the father turned into just an extremely competent hunter and provider. Here he's bringing a sparrow, and then he started to hunt in the middle of the day and catch chipmunks, which weighed, most of his weight, actually. But he was doing what he needed to do to keep his brood going. I think the reason he was resorting to something I would have said, screech owls do not hunt in the middle of the day, and they would not catch something as sizable as a chipmunk. But I think our yard is actually not very good screech owl habitat, and I think he felt pressed to go into overdrive. And that's another thing, is they have flexibility. They can realize certain things and feel certain needs, and that changes drives, which is in a way one of the most basic things about anything that is alive, is that living things have agency. Living things have things they have to do. That's really the difference between everything that's alive and everything that's not alive. So the chicks grew, and everybody was healthy, and everybody stayed alive. And then the chicks left the nest, and they found out right away that the world is not necessarily a friendly place all the time, because they were immediately attacked by blue jays and robins, and that's a blue jay kicking one of the young ones off a branch and making it fall to the ground. That happened a number of times that first morning that the young ones left the nest. That's not really a soft release. It was a very natural release. It was a natural fledging. It was nothing soft about it. It was a battle that morning, and I thought somebody might get hurt or killed. Also, if you ever find a baby owl on the ground, I would have thought they're stranded on the ground, and the ground is a really dangerous place because you got all these feral cats and house cats, loose cats running around. At night you have, raccoons and possums, and in the daytime you have Cooper's hawks and things like that. But what really shocked me was they will walk to the nearest tree and then they walk up the trunk. I don't think songbirds can do this, but these little owls, they walk up to, they did this repeatedly. This was simply a thing that they do. They knew instinctively and they had been in a box their whole lives. And then the first morning out, they're walking up the trees and they're fluttering their wings, which are not really toned up yet. So that was astonishing. Like almost everything about this whole thing was astonishing. And Alfie was a great parent, you probably all know that when there are multiple chicks in a brood, there's a young one who's a runt and gets less and then fails to thrive and then starves to death. And that is exactly the opposite of what I saw here. By dawn, those chicks were so stuffed that she would often be hopping from one to the other trying to get them to eat. And they were too full to want any more. And if one of them hadn't had a turn, she'd go, if they were like 10 feet or so from each other, she would just fly over to the branch that the chick was on and make sure that it had an opportunity to get the last of whatever it was that she had at that time. So that was another thing that was not the way you usually learn it. So I had called the male, I haven't mentioned this, but I had called the male +1. That was my name for him, because when we first saw him, we said, Alfie has a +1. So his name was +1. And then when the young ones came out, I said, I'd like to name them, but I can't tell them apart. And my wife said, well, why don't we just have a collective name for them? We'll just call them the Who. So it was Alfie +1 and the Who. And because everybody lived and was doing so well, it was really a very happy time that first breeding season. Now, I got here late today, and we didn't get a chance to test whether any sound comes out of it. Do you know anything about the sound system here? All right, well, this is a video, and it has some sound. And so in case the sound works, I'd just like to ask you to be quiet, and you will hear, if it works, you'll hear her make a sound that you will never see described in any field guide, because it's the most intimate sound they make. It's not one of the 2 calls that the field guides tell you they make. They really make like 5 or 6 calls. But one of them is very, very intimate. I call it the cozy call. It's usually at the most intimate moments of contact or when she's in the nest. And this is really her word for love. And with that introduction, I really, really hope you can hear it. Now watch the way she just leans into my touch, just the way a dog would, actually. I thought that was just extraordinarily profound, because like I said earlier, we have not had a common ancestor for 300 million years, and yet the vertebrate nervous system was already so well set, the same nervous system that she inherited, that each one of us has inherited, already so set that after 300 million years we still recognize each other, and we can still tangle each other up emotionally. And I can really enjoy that contact and the pleasure of that touch, and so can she, this little owl. These little things that they live all around us, actually. So all of this raised what became for me an enormous question, which is, why don't we know who we are here with on this planet? Why don't we know that these are relational beings? We see them as scenery, if we see them at all. We see birds. I heard somebody the other day, I was in somebody's yard for an eclipse party, and somebody was saying, oh, I don't like blue jays. Well, why is it up to you to decide whether you like blue jays or not? They've been here for 30 million years. You actually don't know anything about blue jays. What are you passing judgment on blue jays for? What, are you kidding? And then she said, well, I suppose you like raccoons, she said to me. I said, oh, I love raccoons. They're fantastic animals, actually. Oh, but they got into my chicken coop one time, and they just killed the chickens. And I said, how many chickens have you eaten? You know. She doesn't like raccoons. Wow. What is up with this attitude that we all have? Or that we all have been raised that way, to decide whether we like blue jays or we like raccoons, like it's up to us. We don't know anything about them. We have no idea who we are here with. You know, I said Alfie knows who she is because she knows where she is and who she's with. Hello, we could do a lot better knowing who we're here with. So I thought, is our disconnection a natural limitation of human intelligence, or are we taught to disconnect? So if we are taught to disconnect, we could find that out by asking, what are other people taught, and is it any different? If everybody's taught the same thing, then maybe it's just a natural thing about the human mind. So I looked at what different cultures were traditionally taught about the human place in the world and in the cosmos. There were indigenous peoples all around the world. Their cultures in many ways are very, very different from each other, except that their ideas and their teachings about the human relationship with other living things are remarkably similar across all these different cultures. And what they're taught is all living things are family. Many of their creation stories have other kinds of animals helping humans get into the world, or cushioning the fall from the sky that brought humans into the world, making sure that we had a soft landing on Earth, and the idea that we are all related and all family, and that all living things deserve and must be given the most respect, partly out of a fear that if they are disrespected, they will withhold what we need from them. And then I looked at South Asian, mostly religions, the Dharmic religions, that many of them believe in reincarnation, that any soul has all these experiences living in all these different life forms, and the teaching that we live in a relational net, a net of relationships, that is what the universe and the world are, a net of relationships, and that humans are different, just like each thing is different. Elephants are different, birds are different, humans are different, but not better. And then I looked at East Asian religions and philosophies like Confucianism that are not really religions. What did they teach? Well, they taught that the world is full of things that seem like opposites, but actually are necessary opposites to make up the unity of the world. That's what keeps the balance. So you can't have up without down, you can't have forward without back, you can't have life without death, you can't have male without female. All these things that seem like opposites are actually two sides of a coin. They're necessary to, the diversity is necessary to create the unity that makes the whole thing. And that's the yin and yang idea, to oversimplify. And then there's a fourth cultural realm, and that is the West, which was started in ancient Greece. And Plato said, these things that look like opposites are opposites. They're opposing forces. And this is called a dualistic view of the world. And he said, the earth is not a nice place. It's full of disease and decay. And that's not good. We can imagine things that are better. So the fact that we can imagine them must mean that perfection exists somewhere outside of space and time. A perfect realm exists. In that perfect realm, there is a perfect circle, there's a perfect table, a perfect horse, there's perfect brown, there's perfect love, as we call platonic love, the idea that there's perfect love. But Plato's idea was that there was perfect everything, but none of it was here on earth. The earth was a flawed representation of things that are perfect outside of space and time, somewhere in some other realm. His star student was Aristotle. Aristotle thought, no, a brown dog is not just an example of perfect dog and perfect brown. A brown dog is a dog that's brown. But Aristotle came up with the scala natura, says that humans are the best thing, humans are better than everything, and that the whole rest of the world is on a scale, like a caste system of worthiness, and that all of it ultimately is here just to serve us. So this philosopher, Crispin Sartwell, wrote in the New York Times that this devaluation of the physical world and the living world is the basis of our culture, and that it's the worst idea in the culture, and that it really means that nature is here only to yield us everything, and that we, of course, owe nature nothing whatsoever. So last July, my daughter phoned me from the house. I was out of the house. She phoned me and she said, I think our house is on fire. I see a lot of smoke outside the window. And I had to tell her the good news. The good news was, our house is not on fire. Canada is on fire. When the good news is that Canada is on fire, when that's the good news, then you know that something really different has happened. I was outside having a little bit of a hard time breathing because of all the smoke in the air. I don't know how many of you remember feeling that. And I was thinking, what about all these birds that are trying to, these aerobic athletes, these professional athletes that have little chicks in all these nests all around us, trying to keep them alive, and now they're trying to just breathe in this air. What is it doing to them? Trees are the best, fastest, easiest, cheapest way to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The same thing that's causing all the warming and drying that is letting these fires go out of control. And yet we are letting the forests burn. And in some cases, we are setting them on fire. The only other place I've ever seen that much smoke in the air was in Brazil, where those fires are all set by people. They're burning the Amazon. We've had enormous fires on the West Coast. I know 3 people who had their houses burned down in California in different fires. You may remember a few years ago the fires in Australia that were out of control for weeks at a time. This is a different time in the world. We can't solve problems that we keep creating every single day. We have a system where you can take, but you don't have to give, or you don't have to take care of. You can just take from without taking care of. And we all have ideas about rights. We have the Bill of Rights. We have the UN Declaration of Human Rights. I'm sure all the very nice people in the room here, we all would like to see everybody have their rights, and that's good. But rights are what you think you deserve to get. We don't have a Bill of Responsibilities. We don't have a Declaration of Responsibilities. We have no deal with the world. We just think that the world is here to let us take from it all the time. And that's because our culture has set the physical world's value as 0, starting with Plato. Plato's ideas were taken by Jewish philosophers into Judaism, and then were really amplified by the earliest Christian theologians. Plato's realm of perfection outside of space and time is our idea of heaven. That's where we got it from. And this idea that we need to focus not on this world, but on getting to heaven, that was basically Plato's idea. We're still living in 3,000-year-old, whatever you want to call that. Let's call it a perception. And we have people who are in charge of fixing a problem. They're the same people who insist on perpetuating the problem. We've been talking about climate change for 50 years. We've had all these different meetings, and that red line is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Do you know why it goes up and down and up and down and up and down like that every year? That's because it's a really good measure, and most of the land on the planet is in the northern hemisphere. When it's summer in the northern hemisphere, all the plants draw down the carbon dioxide, but they don't draw down enough of it to make up for the addition, and that's why it just keeps going up and up. And why it keeps going up and up despite all those agreements and accords and everything like that is because really we just don't care. We take about half of all of the land for producing food in about the most aggressive and destructive way possible, and that is to say nothing about what we simply yank out of the oceans all the time, and the results of that are very, very predictable. In 1970, when I was in high school, we had Earth Day. We had Earth Day because there were already big problems, and people cared enough at that time to say, let's do something here, let's celebrate the world, let's fix the problems. It made a lot of progress. We had all the environmental laws that got onto the books, that the Congress passed, a Republican president signed, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, and several others. We had a change of heart there for a little while. But since then, the world's populations of wildlife, even though it was a big problem at that time, since then they've declined by 2/3 in aggregate. And we've lost 1/3 of the birds in North America just since then. And that wasn't like, virgin timber and virgin prairies in 1970. A lot had already been completely converted. Nowadays, 70% of all the birds in the world are what you call poultry, the things that raccoons like to eat. And 96% of all of the mammals in the world are humans and the animals we raise to kill and eat. We don't think about this, most of us, most of the time, because we are taught not to think about it. When we get our diploma, we are told, congratulations, here's your diploma. You're now an educated member of our society. And we don't know where our food, water, energy, or any of the material that we use comes from. We don't know where our waste goes, really. We don't have any idea about who lives around us, who's migrating past us. But there is one thing we have learned. We know how to shop. We have not been made citizens. We have been made consumers. And to be a consumer means to be disconnected from our consequences of our consumption. So what would it look like if we loved the world instead? Well, a lot of people think that what we need is new technologies, that new technologies can be invented to solve all of these problems. But that's not really what we need. What we really need is a completely different way of valuing life, valuing existence, valuing the world, valuing the relationships that we are here with, seeing us as relational beings, like those owls, rather than transactional beings. And that's because we can have new technologies that will perpetuate the same problems unless we have new values, because all technologies serve the values that send them into the world. Talking about moral revolutions can seem quite silly, but we have actually had a bunch of them in very different kinds of moral revolutions. And it's not the technology that advances us, it's changes in values. That's when progress or regress can happen. And the thing is that values are the most scalable thing because they're the perfect accessories. You can take them everywhere. They go with anything you're wearing. They go with everything you do. So we really need to retire this idea that humans are the only thing that matters and try to get a little bit of an inkling about what it means to be alive on this planet, what life is. All the life around us has made the journey to be here with us today. If you try to wrap your mind around the true depth and the true complexity and the true proliferation of life in time and across space here, it becomes instantly overwhelming. Our minds are really not very well equipped to really understand this, certainly not intuitively. But if you think about a sense of connection to something that is bigger than you in time and in space, that sense of reconnecting is the Latin root of the word religion. Religion means to have a sense of connection to something bigger in time and space. And so, just to be funny about it for a second, because we're getting a little serious here, I see a certain analogy. The Catholic Pope has come around to thinking that the physical world deserves to be seen as a matter of religious concern or religious awareness. This is a little late in the game, maybe, since indigenous people have seen it that way for about 100,000 years, and all of those South and East Asian religions saw it this way thousands of years ago. But okay, better late than never. And a writer, a friend of mine, Paul Greenberg, and I, we wrote an article saying maybe Earth Day should be thought of as a religious holiday, where not that you worship the world, but that you see the world as holy. All living things are holy. Everything that lives is a holy thing. We use the word sacred. We say this building is a sacred building, this book is a sacred book. We would never say this owl is a sacred being. Well, I would say that. The complexity of the living world is really overwhelming. It's an overwhelming thing in reality and intellectually. In reality, we have the laws of the universe, and one of the basic laws of physics, maybe the sort of like the most fundamental, biggest law of physics, is the one that says that the entire universe tends toward disorder. That's the second law of thermodynamics. Well, life gives the second law the middle finger, because life is self-organizing, self-perpetuating, self-proliferating. It gets more and more complicated. It maintains that complexity against all of the disordering forces of the universe. When you have something that breaks the laws of physics, that's called a miracle. And we live on a miraculous planet. But we usually don't see it that way. We usually don't honor it in anything like that way. And if you don't like that view, you can just think of it as a very literal endeavor to connect landscapes so that other animals have some ability to hang on and maintain the movements that they need to get across roads without getting slaughtered. People have done this now for everything from elephants to crabs that need to get to where they need to breed. But in order to let crabs do this, you have to be thinking about crabs. You have to care about crabs a little bit. Last fall in Chicago, there was a building that 1,000 birds during the fall migration hit this building and died in one night. They had been asked to turn their lights down. They just didn't care. We had a similar problem in New York City with the lights for the 9/11 tribute, and the very simple answer was just turn the lights off for 20 minutes every hour, let the birds reorient and go by. Otherwise, they just keep circling that light in the dark night until they fall exhausted and dead. It doesn't really take that much. You just have to think about it and care a little bit about it. Philadelphia is doing that now with their lights on their skyline during the migration seasons. So, what should we all do tomorrow morning with this news? Just see ourselves a little bit differently. And think about the whole living world in whatever we're doing. And try to bring some of that sense of relationality into it. Maybe we don't need half of all of the land to grow food. Maybe we can grow food vertically and not need pesticides and have a lot more productivity per acre. There's some experimental farms on the east end of Long Island. Stony Brook University that I'm affiliated with is running some experimental farm plots where they have solar panels and they're growing vegetables. And they find that with some vegetables grow better in the partial shade of the solar panels as the light and the shadows change during the day. They get a higher yield of tomatoes on a farm that is making electricity and is actually not even carbon neutral, is carbon negative. And they're getting a greater yield and making electricity. So all we need to do is start thinking about these things, and better technology will flow from a change in thinking and a change in how we are valuing things. So my dream is to connect the beauty and abundance of life with human dignity and a sense of the great chain of being in everything that we think about and do. And to realize that it's not going to be technology alone that's going to save the world. It's going to be what's in our hearts. So I invite you to open to the miracle of this world that we are in. And that's my message from a little owl who taught me that even owls have a word for love. Thank you so much. We have these books here, but I also wanted to let you know that a kid's version of just the owl part of that story is coming out in June. I just got my first couple of copies in the mail, and it's really sweet and it's really cute and nice and doesn't threaten anybody. So, yeah, I'll be very happy to take any questions. Yes. I don't think so. No, I think that was, and I've even read this about snowy owls. And one thing I saw about snowy owls that they're just exceptional at making sure all of the young ones get whatever food they have and not let one fall behind. And I think there are a lot of other situations where that falling behind happens, but definitely not in my backyard. And I think it's a thing with owls probably that some or maybe many of the owls are just unusually good parents and seem to be aware of trying to make sure everybody gets enough food. If the food is short, if there is a famine or something, a bad season or a terrible drought, probably it's not as nice. But where they have the food, they make sure everybody gets some. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. So they live around 10 years in the wild, if they get to live 10 years. That's a life span possibility. There is a lot of mortality in the first year. The young ones disperse. They don't hang around. They don't try to hang around. The adults wouldn't let them hang around. They do what most of us did, which is when they get to be the right age, they go and try to find their own stake in the world. But the imperative for them is it's pretty one way. They have to. They have to find a territory with an opening. Yes. Alfie has raised a total of 10 young ones in a total of 4 nesting years. But one of those years, her first mate plus one apparently died because he didn't return in year 3. And she laid 4 eggs. She incubated them about a week longer than would have been the case if they were fertile and they hatched. And then she gave up. And I was in such distress because that spring she was calling and calling and calling and calling and calling, and nobody came. And then her hormones all cycled, and she laid those eggs, and they were not fertile. And when it was mid-June, and we were supposed to have a happy family, and she was supposed to have young ones to feed, there was nobody there. I think I'm very good at not projecting, but I may be projecting when I say she seemed a little bit lost and lonely when her hormones were ready for having young ones to take care of, and there was nobody there. And it was then that she came down on that low branch where I was scratching her, and she leaned into my touch that I showed you in the video. It was that year when right when she should have had a brood and she had nobody. And then last year there was a new mate. She laid 5 eggs, 4 hatched, all 4 fledged. So she's got 10 fledglings that have gone out in the world. And that mate from last year came back. And I think she's on eggs again now, just like in the last 2 days. I think she is. So looking forward to some more happy stuff. Well, depending a little bit on where you live, but the best thing to do is to put up one of those boxes. And there's a book called The Screech Owl Companion that tells you everything that is known about attracting and having them, different designs for nest boxes and stuff like that. The big trick about putting the nest box up is to put it up in a way that it won't immediately get taken over by squirrels. That's the big competition problem. And I solved it by putting it on the wall of the house rather than on a tree. You could try putting it on a pole or something like that. But that's the big problem. This spring I had a problem because a squirrel moved in, and I had to. I noticed that I actually heard a squirrel on the roof, and I saw a squirrel actually go in the nest. And then the next day, there were a bunch of leaves in there. So I put the ladder up, I cleaned it all out, and I took a takeout coffee cup and I stuffed the entrance so that the squirrel couldn't get back in. That worked. And at that time of the year, Alfie was not using the box. She was roosting in what I call the ivy tower, which is this big cascade of English ivy on this gigantic old maple, and she likes it in there. And in the winter, in the non-breeding season, she's usually roosting in there during the day, and the nest box is usually empty. So I got that squirrel to go somewhere else in that way. Yes. Yeah, where does it? Yeah, right. No, so that's a just a fantastic thing to sort of ponder. It starts. Um, it's spotty. First of all, it's spotty, and secondly, it starts in some very shockingly what we would think of as primitive and much older oriented, much older originated animals. There are amphipods that feed their young. They are amphipods that have parental care. All birds have parental care. All mammals have at least female care of young. A lot of mammals have no male care of young. Chimpanzee males do not take care of offspring, in a way that we think of as taking care, except a male chimpanzee will sometimes adopt an orphan, but will never take any care of a young chimp that is likely to be his own child, much less all the other chimps in the community there. So it's spotty. Wolves are fantastic fathers. Wolves and humans probably have the most similar male parental care nuclear family kind of a setup. Because a wolf pack is a nuclear family. There's a breeding mom and dad, and then their young ones from the last 2 or 3 years. And when those young ones get to be mature adolescents, they leave and they try to find their own stake in the world. But a pack is really a breeding pair and their children helping them. And male wolves are totally devoted to providing food and defense. And if a male wolf wanders into a pack where the father has recently gone missing, is dead, and there are young ones, the male will adopt the young ones. Whereas in lions, new males always kill all the cubs. So this question has no really good generalizable answer. It's quite all over the map, and care of some kind starts, like I said, way early in the animal history with these at least little amphipods. I don't know about others. There may be others that I don't know about, but I'm astonished that there are amphipods that feed their babies. And, and it's equally kind of astonishing that male chimps don't do anything except fight with each other and maintain the community. And that's a whole other thing. And I wrote a lot about that in a book called Becoming Wild. But anyway, it's a really good question, and there's no good generalizable answer to it. Yes. So that's a great question. My relationship with Plus One and vice versa. He seemed to take his cues from her, that if she was so comfortable with me being close, and I was obviously not at all threatening to her at that proximity, then he could probably be pretty me. And he was, if I was about 30 feet away from him, this thing is cutting in and out. If I was about 30 feet away from him, he would do whatever he wanted to do. They would mate or he would deliver food or something like that. With Alfie, I could be 2 feet away from her. She's just thoroughly tame and familiar. But an interesting thing is her new mate is, first of all, I saw Plus One every evening. The new mate, I saw him about twice last year before the eggs hatched. And that's one reason I thought last year, I don't even know if he's still around. I don't know if she's sitting on another infertile clutch or what in the world is going on here. And he does not tolerate me near the nest when there are chicks. He is constantly threatening me. He comes streaking by, screaming, and you may have heard that owls are silent in flight, but they're silent in flight. If Alfie flies right in front of me like this, there is no sound. and I was in the woods behind the house last year looking for the four fledged chicks just this past summer. And I was sort of padding around right around sunset, and I'm trying to listen to see if I hear any food calls. And all of a sudden, I got punched on the side of the head. I had no idea he was coming, and he came from outside my field of view. And plus one, in the hundreds of times I saw plus one, and in the several weeks I was around him and the chicks, he came flying toward me, and he dipped in a little, and he clacked his beak 2 times. And this other one is constantly trying to drive me away, and just whammed me in the side of the head that one time. So that's another thing about them, is that they're not just marbles. They're little personalities. They're all a little different. No, I don't think they have friends or that they mingle. And I'm not sure the apparent diameter of their territory, which I don't really know with her because I don't want to put a tracker on her or anything like that. So, but from reading about, there's one or two studies in Connecticut where they like have a half-mile diameter territory on average. It's not very big, and they would keep other owls out. They would be territorial about it. A kind of a weird thing is that I don't ever see the males. Well, not don't ever. I almost never see or hear the males outside the breeding season. So from midsummer until the following February, I usually have no idea where the males are, and they're not apparently around. Neither of those two mates seem to be around in the off season. So they're not supposed to migrate either. Screech owls are supposedly totally non-migratory, but he may be on a different part of the territory. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think our home is in good screech owl habitat because the woods are all Norway maples, and they're not producing acorns and nuts like that, which would build up a big mouse population. And right at our house, we feed birds, and there's a lot of potential for us to have a rodent problem. And we have almost no mice in or around the house, but only half a mile away, we have offices in a small old house there. That has a much more natural bunch of trees around it, and there's like no end to the white-footed mice that will come in if there's any food left out or anything. So there's a mouse problem half a mile away, and there's like scarcity around our house. So that makes me think that maybe the male is occupying a different part of the territory, somewhere where he just is doing better catching food. I don't really know, because I think they should be together more, even in the off season. I would think that he would want to be doing a little bit more guarding, but it hasn't worked that way in our case. Anyway, okay. Great final comments. Thank you so much for being here.